So I'm a neuropsychologist, and in a way, what we think about is brain-behavior relationships, or behavior-brain relationships. So how does our brain, or how do our brains function, and then how does MS have an impact on how the brain functions? Everybody knows about white matter. White matter, does anybody know who Al Gore is? Al Gore? Al Gore talked about the information superhighway and how he invented it, but actually the original information superhighway is all the white matter that we have in our brains. We have beautiful clumps of gray matter that can hold all sorts of information, but it's the white matter that lets the different parts of the brain communicate well. And if those parts, if the brain is working as a whole, and things are communicating well and communicating efficiently, then we have a brain that learns well. When something happens, like MS in this case, what you end up with is a brain that still works, but in essence works a little less efficiently than it could. And when I'm working with some of the kids that Sanita sends, or Daniela, many times what we're trying to figure out is what are not just for this individual, but also in order to help with school, home, whatever. What are the strengths and what are the challenges? What are the weaknesses that show up in terms of our neuropsychological testing? So if you think about a brain that works less efficiently, there are some things that kind of come to mind in terms of this might be more affected than that. So if you think about white matter, how efficiently, how quickly does information get from one point A to point B, that is going to slow down. If you think about, let's say you have a water main running from one side of town to the other, and that's typically in, say, a pipe that's about 1 meter in diameter, and all of a sudden it is a pipe that's 0.5 meter in diameter. So water still gets through from one side to the other, but it gets through much less efficiently, much more slowly. And in a way, that's how you can think about information processing, or the speed of information processing, or the efficiency of information processing. That's one of the prime areas that we expect to be affected by MS in the kids or adolescents that we work with. Often what you also see are some of the functions that we have that involve many more parts of our brain than just one thing. If I say, let's see, a good example would be what we call executive functioning. Has everybody or anybody heard of executive functioning? Yeah. How would you describe, well, let me describe it, executive functioning. This is what I do, so I hopefully will do it well. Executive functioning, you can think of as the conductor of an orchestra. So if we think about the conductor and think about the orchestra, over here we have the strings, say violins and violas, and over here we have brass instruments, and over here we have winds, and over here we have, as the conductor, you don't actually play all of those instruments. But if the conductor isn't doing a good job of saying we need a little more of this, a little more of that, a little less of this, ready for the big crescendo, then the orchestra is not going to sound very good. It's not going to work very efficiently, very effectively, and it's not going to be a beautiful piece of music. So the executive functioning, or that orchestra, the conductor, is in essence kind of a whole brain system. And if you have different parts of the brain's white matter that are affected, that conductor is not going to work very well. Or if it does work well, it will work inefficiently or inconsistently. And sometimes these are the things that really end up having a big effect on some of the kids or adolescents that we work with. I didn't bring a case example, but if I think about some of the kids that I've seen, you know, often they'll be described as lazy or unmotivated or even willfully disobeying. And why is that? Because on Monday, you know, little Peter could do all of these math questions, and then when we came back to that same math question on Wednesday, he didn't do it. And I think he didn't do it because he was lazy, because he was unmotivated, because he wanted to stick it to the man and let him know that, you know, I have my own mind too. And often that isn't the case. If the conductor is working well, if everything, if for whatever reason the conductor is working well and the orchestra plays the way that it should, then you have a smooth running and an efficient working brain, and importantly, efficient output in terms of what parents, teachers, or hockey coaches, whoever, are looking for. When it doesn't happen, and when you see inconsistency, then you can have misinterpretations in terms of that internal state of the child or adolescent. What else takes a whole brain to do? You guys are all paying attention, and I know you're doing it because you are trying to give me an example of, yes, this is something that requires a whole brain as well. Paying attention actually sounds very simple, but it's actually quite a complex thing, because we not only have to focus and attend on what, in this case, Peter is saying, we also have to filter things out, right? So we have to have sustained and focused attention, but we also have to be able to filter out, you know, I missed a cookie at the break, or whatever, or there are all sorts of other thoughts that come into our mind. I wonder when he's going to finish so that we can go back home and shovel snow and whatever. All of these distracting thoughts that we have to filter out as well. Or if you're in a classroom, you know, somebody walks by the doorway, or a bird flies past the window, or somebody drops a pencil or shuffles paper or takes a sip of coffee. But everybody still pays attention because it's a nice example of a full brain activity. What happens when you pay attention? Right, you can register what is going on around you. If you can register what's going on around you, then you can remember. Attention is kind of like the gateway to memory. So if you have somebody who has difficulty paying attention, either verbally or orally or visually, then memory doesn't work that well either. How do we learn? We learn by listening, we learn by watching, we learn by doing. Essentially, we learn by remembering, right? So if we're thinking about a developing brain and thinking about how we move along through life, how we develop, how we evolve, memory ends up playing a huge role in things as well. One of the things that makes MS potentially, at least, such a an impactful disease in kids or in adolescents relative to adults is the fact that you have a developing brain. So, you know, you have a brain that is in the process of growing, in the process of myelinating, the white cheese. It's in the process of developing neural networks that in essence, kind of create templates or create ways that we've learned or things that we do or patterns for how we know, how we learn, how we do things. And because the brain is still in development, that ends up having potentially a big impact. In my very low-tech way, I'm going to step out of the squared circle for just a moment. Low tech. If you consider this line, this top line, as say a brain that does not have MS or does not have epilepsy or autism or any of these other things that we talked about, if this is the normal trajectory of development, and let's say something happens here. Sunita, what's the average age when someone would develop MS?
A child, it would be...
No.
In any age.
Yes.
Around 20, in the
Early
early 20s.
20s.
Early to mid-20s.
Mid-20s, say. And when do we expect myelination of the brain to be, roughly speaking, complete?
Around before that.
Yeah, so in essence, if you think about a kind of a typical or prototypical case of multiple sclerosis, in essence, what's happening is a fully developed brain is being affected. When you think about a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 13-year-old, all of a sudden, things are happening that move you off of that trajectory. That move you off of that trajectory. And you end up having a potential impact on the development of that brain, on the development of that person throughout. That has a huge impact. If you think about I'll kind of branch into some of the psychosocial issues, but really if you think about neuropsychology or cognitive processes and psychosocial, really it's like a hand in a glove. You know, you really can't tell where one ends and where the other begins, because how many, let's see, you have sat in a high school cafeteria, right, recently. Has anybody else sat in a high school cafeteria within the past 5 or 10 years? Yeah? Is it kind of like this, like where there's one conversation going on and where, you know, you can actually just sit and, yes, I'm going to listen to my friend as she or he talks about what they did on the weekend, and that's all I'm going to focus on? No. No, a high school cafeteria, wow, my goodness. You have like 50 different things going on. These guys are over here playing euchre for Cadbury Easter cream eggs because it's close to Easter. And you want to know who's going to be winning because maybe if they have an extra egg, you'll get one at the end as well. And somebody's talking about what they did on the weekend. Somebody else is talking about, did you see the latest episode of Big Bang Theory? I can't believe that Howard said this or did that. And somebody else is talking about, you know, what a crappy cafeteria we have. And somebody else is talking about a trip to Germany. And somebody else is talking about whatever, right? If you have a normally functioning brain, it can be very difficult to actually interact in that environment. And if you have a half-meter pipe instead of a full-meter pipe, it can be very difficult to keep up with that. And it can be very fatiguing as well. Most times you go to the cafeteria for lunch to get a break from math and from science and from French and geography, whatever. But sometimes if you're having to focus and filter all of that stuff out, sometimes it can be even more fatiguing trying to put up with all of that. And then on top of it, your best friend who's telling you what she did on the weekend. You not only have to do all this, you also have to really pay attention, because when she says, and then he said this, or then she said that, you need to be able to say, oh my God, that's horrible. Or wait, no, oh, that was great, sorry about that. So it ends up being a very impactful environment that the adolescent or child or adolescent is functioning in. If you think about the impact on a psychosocial perspective again, yeah, we're wired to be social animals, right? We're wired to connect. We're wired to be able to, you know, it's not just looking at somebody, it's not just listening to somebody, it's actually making a connection with them. And especially when you're talking about pregnancy, usually with pregnancy there's somebody else involved, and usually that's somebody that you want to be connected to in one way or another. Well, two ways or another, I guess. But that ends up being a very, very important and very multi-layered relationship as well. And trying to keep all of that in perspective, and trying to, especially when you're an adolescent and you're feeling these emotions, these feelings for the first time, it's difficult to put in a good context. Jessica, you said a couple of very interesting things in your, well, actually I don't know what you said. I know what was translated, more so. I lost you at tout le monde, and then it's like, okay, and I turned to Jason, come on, fill me in. But you said a couple of things that I thought were very interesting from a psychosocial perspective as well. You mentioned exercise. Initially, you cried a lot, and initially you were, yeah, likely kind of devastated and distraught about, you know, here you are going like this, and all of a sudden something's happened, and somebody says, oh, you know, you have this, and you're not really you know a bit about what this is, but when you look at it more, you realize, holy crap, I'm going off the curve here. But then you decided a couple of things. You had said you exercise, so you're going to keep yourself as fit and as able to do as many things as you can, and nothing's going to stop you, right? You ended up with a, yeah, I'll steal my own punchline later, but there are a couple of different categories of coping and a couple of different strategies, and one is a problem-focused way of coping, and another is an emotional-focused way of coping. And if you look at the research around styles of coping and what tends to be more positive, that problem-focused, I'm not going to let this stop me. This initially looked like an obstacle to me, but now I see it as a challenge. Now I see it as an opportunity. I am going to do A, B, and C so that I'll be in, you know, a better place to tackle it when I'm 14, when I'm 16, when I'm 18, when I'm 20. That involves exercise. That involves, I think as importantly, a sense of self-efficacy, a sense of I can do this. If you think about things from a psychosocial perspective again, there are all sorts of things in the literature. You know, depression is common, anxiety is common, fatigue is common, kind of cognitive difficulties, or some of the things we talked about at the beginning are common. But it in a way comes down to that's there, but what do we do about it? How are we going to move forward with this? Adopting a problem-focused approach rather than an emotion-focused approach. The woe is me is good for a while. I live in a house of estrogen. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 beautiful daughters. I have 2 female cats. Because I have a beautiful wife and 2 beautiful daughters, most of our visitors are also estrogen-laced characters. So every once in a while, I have a woe is me as well. Oh, God. Most of our good friends have 3 daughters or 2 daughters, or so the odd time, you know, you have to just say, enough of the woe is me. I'm going to build a fireplace in the backyard. And I'm going to start a father support group in my neighborhood, because I am taking a problem-focused approach. Enough of this emotion-focused stuff. So the emotions absolutely play a role in it, but at some point it needs to shift to more of a problem-focused, more of a doing thing. And that was absolutely beautiful to hear you estrogen creature say, I am going to do this. I am going to exercise. I'm not going to let this stop me. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions or a panel as well. And I know, do I have 5 minutes left? 5 minutes? I see the big 5. Okay. Physical activity has a huge role. If we can keep ourselves fit and healthy, no matter what happens, we will be better able to face whatever comes. There's some interesting research in MS. 90% of it is adult, 10% of it is kids. And then in the adult or in the kid world, 90% of it is kind of medical, neurological scanning, diagnosis, and 10% of it is kind of neuropsych. And of the neuropsychological / psychological, 98% of that is attention, memory, information processing, verbal, visual, blah, 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 blah. And you have a little tiny bit that's about psychosocial things, the other things that we're talking about. So you can end up looking, I think it's difficult to really say, yes, in pediatric MS, we've studied the effects of meditation and mindfulness on blah, 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 because we haven't. But if you look at chronic disease, of which MS is a chronic disease, yes, meditation has been very helpful. Mindfulness-based therapy is very helpful. Yoga is very helpful. There's some very interesting work in a field called benefit finding. And I think again of Jessica, where yeah, you have this diagnosis, and initially you're going to have a strong emotional thing, but then you're going to look around for supports. You're going to be exercising, you're going to be whatever, but I'll bet you have people you can talk to, and I bet you have people who have your back, and I bet you have learned to appreciate them even more than you did before. And I bet that you appreciate life or appreciate different aspects of life more than you did before. And that's an instance of, or an example of, benefit finding. You hear about it all the time. Cancer ends up being kind of the sexy 800-pound monster that gets a lot of the attention, a lot of the funding, a lot of whatever. People, yeah, you get your diagnosis of cancer and you're hit like a hammer, and then you realize, my God, the sun is beautiful when it comes up. And it has an impact on you, right? And you don't have that, you haven't seen that sun before. 2 minutes? 1? 2. Okay. Yeah, things take on a new meaning, a new relevance for you that really enriches your life in a way that it didn't prior. I mentioned self-efficacy and working to adopt different coping strategies or coping procedures. And those are things that can have a huge impact, not only on your physical health, not only on I think also on your course of MS, but also on what people call health-related quality of life. And that's kind of that psychosocial, the entire psychosocial bubble. But those are some of the things I think that can help us move forward, help us, you know, to sound like a U.S. Marine, kind of be all that we can be, and move forward as best as we can. Yes, there will be ups and downs, but the line is still going. C'est tout.